Hey guys, it's Obi here. We're going to work on our last day of U-joints. So I feel like you guys have a pretty good understanding of the purpose of a U-joint, but today we're gonna talk about a little bit with the angles, and then we're going to move into talking about how a U-joint fails and how we would replace a U-joint. So just to start out, when we talk about our U-joints, we remember they spin, um, and our constant input makes a varying output, and then a varying input makes a constant output. So the key is to make everything a constant output with no vibration is that our angles here and here have to be the same. Okay? So when we do that, we're going to look at this. So this would be a transfer case on a vehicle or an output shaft on a transmission. And this would be the differential on a car. So we really want the the transfer case output to be parallel with the differential. So the differential itself is going to move up and down as we go over suspension movement. Now the transfer case is not. It will move very slightly because it's got a rubber mounted uh, transmission mount, but it's not going to move all that much. I mean, the amount of movement we're talking about is probably about a half an inch, unless it's like Baker's, and then it's about the hot dog down the hallway. Let's just put it at that. So the angle that we have right here should be less than 3 degrees. Remember, so this is that angle, should be 1 to 3 degrees. And then this angle here should also be 1 to 3 degrees. Most importantly, whatever this angle is, this should match. So when we are setting up, or let's say we're going to replace a differential and we're doing this on a rock crawler or something, or we're putting a lift kit on it, turning our pinion or our differential so it matches the proper angle as this is critical. Okay? Because remember, the bigger the lift, the more angle we are going to have on this. So now we have to make sure even more so that these two joints are going to be the same angle and parallel to each other. Now you can get away with a little bit if you're off about a degree, and I'm going to say a degree is a pretty good number. I could be off on that. But if you're within a degree, I would say you're going to be just fine. Okay? So one other thing that I want to talk about is that this cap right here and this cap right here should also be parallel to each other or in line. So if we see this line here, we can notice it goes through the center of the cap and it goes through the center of the cap here. If these two are physically twisted, that will also induce an angle. That is not something that's going to typically happen. It's definitely not going to be something that's just going to happen while the person is driving the vehicle unless we've twisted the drive shaft, but it is something that I've seen more than once on a new drive shaft that wasn't welded together properly. So it is something we have to kind of keep in mind, okay? So when we're going to look at a drive shaft on a vehicle, we are going to see one of two styles. We're either going to see a drive shaft like this, that is basically two U-joints and a shaft. Doesn't necessarily mean the slip shaft's going to be here. It's probably going to be into the transmission. But the other style we're going to see is a little bit more like this. This is actually what's called a two-piece drive shaft. So a two-piece drive shaft means we have one U-joint coming out of the transmission. It goes through a carrier bearing, and then we have two U-joints here. So how the heck do we get away with only having three U-joints? Because we know that means this is not going to be a constant output, right? Well, the trick here is that this U-joint really has almost no working angle. It's probably going to be a degree at the most, to more likely a half a degree, but it will get some movement from the transmission flex. The reason we do this is because we don't want our overall drive shaft length to be too long. If we do that, that kind of creates weakness in the drive line. It's kind of the same deal as taking a really long extension and putting it in an impact and spinning at full speed. That thing wants to basically bend sideways on you, right? So we don't want to do that with the drive shaft. What we want to do is maintain that length and keep it shorter, probably less than 60 inches ish. I mean, that's just me. But so if that's the case on like my truck, that's a crew cab long bed, you better believe I got me a nice little carrier bearing in that to shorten that drive line up. So what happens with our drive shafts? So a drive shaft is a hollow tube, just like we've talked about before. And with that hollow tube, if we get a dent in it, we will cause a drive shaft to fail to twist like this. So this lower one here is probably failed due to too much torque, which would be a nice problem to have, right? And this one here, well, it could also be just too much torque. A lot of times what we see on the failure is the drive shaft actually gets a ding in it, and that ding creates a failure point. So that makes that whole tube weak. So what happens is it starts to crumple at the defect in the tube, and when that happens, it's pretty catastrophic. So we actually do see this from time to time. Usually what will happen is you'll get a dent in one because they hit something on the road that came up and hit the drive shaft, and they don't know until the next time that they go to do a burnout, and then you hear a boom, and guess what? Now you have two pieces, and that's no good. Actually, in high performance or racing applications, they usually require a hoop to be mounted around this, and that hoop is there to catch the drive shaft and keep it from just destroying everything underneath the vehicle. Kind of keeps it all safe, I guess is the best way to put that. So this is one way that a drive shaft is going to fail. The other way, obviously, is going to be U-joint failure. By far, a U-joint failure is going to be the most common type. So if we think back to the video where we were watching that driveline squeak, we would replace that U-joint because the bearing itself was dry and they had flat spots, which is also something that's called Brunelling. We talked about that in bearing class, but basically that means that there is a flat spot on one part of the bearing, okay? That's typically what we're going to see with a U-joint failure. It's going to be flat spots on the teeth, and usually that's because it hasn't been greased and it's got water in it and it's gotten rusty. So the bearings eventually quit turning, and then they wear until there's a flat spot, and then you hear that metal on metal squeak. So really that's everything I want to cover on a U-joint. You guys are going to have two videos you have to watch. I'll link the second video, and that's really just talking about how you would replace a U-joint. So remember, our U-joints that we replace are going to look like this, right? So we're going to have the, here, let me go to a better picture. So we're going to have our cross right here, and then possibly two knuckles, one on either side, or two yokes, I'm sorry, and the bearings and the caps. So typically what we see is going to look like this, and if that's the case, go ahead and replace it. That's fine. It's not too hard to do. It takes a little bit of practice, but there is another type of U-joint drive shaft, and it looks like this. This is what is known as a double cardan U-joint. A double cardan U-joint is a lot harder to replace, and I would not recommend you guys do this if you don't know what's going on. If any of you guys can remember from Grant's truck last year, he actually had this joint and he thought he was going to be able to replace it, but there's a U-joint here and a U-joint here, and then there's a spring-loaded component in the middle that forces everything to turn in unison, and it is pretty complicated to put back together. Typically, this is going to go to a specialist like a U-joint drive shaft place. I'm not saying you can't do it, and I'm sure if you spend enough time you could, but you basically have to press this whole thing apart at the same time. So you have to press this half and this half at the same time while maintaining that spring in there. So if you see a U-joint that has this kind of configuration where there's a U-joint here and a here with this little weird looking coupling, do not take it apart unless you're sure about what you're doing, okay? Alright guys, that's all I have for today. You guys watch that other video and answer the questions, and we're going to move on to CV shafts tomorrow. Talk to you later. Bye.